Chapter 31, R2 guttural verbs. Now we want to look at another weak verb that has a guttural in the R2 position. And as you look at this, we'll think of the weaknesses. Again, we have a guttural. And again, you know with gutturals, there's two basic weaknesses. They do not like doggish fortes. And instead of getting a simple vocal schwa, they prefer a composite schwa. So we got to keep those two things in mind. So as you look at section 2, we look at the weaknesses, and again, that's what I described to you. The doggish forte problem obviously will include the guttural, and this problem will be limited to just the intensive stems, the PL, PUL, HITH-PIL. And then the vocal schwa problem, again, is basically with the intensives, but you can see those in other places also. So when you have a vocalic ending, you reduce thematic vowel. Instead of having a simple vocal schwa, you will, or a simple vocal schwa, you will have a composite schwa. So just keep that in mind. So strong areas that are like a strong verb, any area outside of the intensives, the call, the nifal, the hifil, the hofal, those areas are going to be virtually strong. Occasionally you might have to have a composite schwa as your thematic vowel for reduction with a vocalic ending. But other than that, really a lot of strong areas here. The only weaknesses are the intensive stems, and this is very rare. Usually the intensives are the strongest part of the paradigm, and with most verbs it's the intensive stems that are your best friend, but this time they're letting you down. But they don't usually let you down. They're usually pretty good to you. So now let's look at section 4. Let's look at the remedies for the sickness or the infirmity of the doggish forte first. You really have two options. We'll either reject the doggish forte and lengthen the preceding short vowel to a long vowel, or we will have an implicit doggish forte in the R2 guttural. And then again, the short vowel will simply remain in place. So let's look at that. As you look at section 4, number 1, I give you first in the left column the strong verb, what you're used to seeing, but in the right-hand column there, an R2 guttural verb with the doggish rejected. And so the example I'm giving you here is a root barach like this. And notice it's a PL. And again, this is a resh, and this is what you would expect, something like this. This is, again, doggish lene. Don't worry about that in the bait. But that's what you expect, but hopefully that doggish forte in the resh gives you indigestion, because we can never have such a thing. And so what happens is the resh rejects the doggish forte, and the preceding short hirik is now lengthened to a sere to compensate for that. And so that's the answer for that. If you were to make this an imperative, of course you would have a patach here. You reject the doggish forte, and so we'll lengthen by taking the patach to a long kametz. And so we have to watch out for that. And then one more example I want to give you. Suppose we had something like a pual here. If you had let's make it a pual. A pual imperfect. You would expect something like this, and then you would expect a dagesh in the resh. And when it rejects it, well, what are you going to do now? Well, we're going to lengthen the kibbutz to a holum. So you have to watch out for that. Kibbutz going to a holum. Something that we have not really run into yet, but we have to keep that in mind. And so watch out for that. If the short vowel under the first root letter is a kibbutz, we want to lengthen it to a holum when we reject and lengthen. But there's another way we can do it, and that is we can have implicit dagesh. And so the example root I give you for that is nacham, like this. And for your PL, let's just put a sere there. And you would expect a dagesh here, but as you know, that's an absolute no-no in Hebrew. And so this time, instead of rejecting the dagesh and lengthening, we're going to have the implicit dagesh. And if you remember back to the article in chapter 7, we had that same phenomenon, especially with the chet. And so this is an implicit dagesh. And again, for let's say a PL imperative, again, you will get a patach, and you will not lengthen it to a kametz. And again, if we were to have some type of a pual form where you have the kibbutz, again, you could have an implicit dagesh and that not lengthened to a holem. Again, it's implicit. Well, as you can tell, the issue is this. How do we know when it's rejected, and how do we know when it's implicit? And if you look at the chart in this section, this chart that we have sort of helps you with this. What we have here is we have the PL pual in Hithpael. And then I list the gutturals in the order that they come in the alphabet. So we have the aleph, the hey, the chet, the ayin, and then of course resh will be a guttural here because we're dealing with a dagesh problem. Okay, what you want to do as you memorize this is start in the middle with the chet, because the chet always implies the dagesh. The I that I have written here means implies dagesh forte. And then I have an R, which means rejects dagesh forte and lengthens preceding short vowel. And so what we have here is the chet right in the middle here is all implicit. And then what you do is draw what looks like sort of a funny little arrow pointing to the I here, and then another funny little arrow pointing out like this. So it's sort of like branching out. These are all implicits, which means if you have your R2 guttural is a hey, and it's a PL, we're going to expect an implicit dagesh, you see. And so for these forms here that have the I, they're implicit. But for those forms that have the R, we will lengthen, and as you can see, that's for all the alephs, all the reshes, but then here are the two tough ones, the hey pual and the ayin pual. They will also reject and lengthen. But something has to be kept in mind here. These are general rules. There are many exceptions to these things. And so even though I'm giving you this pattern, and this pattern again is generally correct, there are exceptions. So you could get rejection and lengthening, let's say here for instance, and it's not impossible that you could get, for instance here, an implicit. But those would be exceptions, and what we want to learn is the major patterns, and when exceptions come our way, well, we'll deal with them. But for right now, memorize this pattern here. And again, I think if you'll memorize this chart by the chet with the I, and then again sort of branch them off as I have here with these little arrows pointing into the middle I, that'll help you to memorize this chart. And so again, that will determine whether to do the implicit dagesh or to reject the dagesh and so forth. Now, the next remedy we need to talk about is in section 5 of our chapter, and that is the infirmity of vocal schwa, but there's not much to say here because R2 is going to get a composite schwa, and 99.9% of the time it's a chetef patach, and so just remember that. Now we come to section 6, and we have final considerations. Normally for the call, I have to tell you the thematic vowels, and so usually, I have to tell you something like this. This is a matter of looking up in the dictionary, really, to find out your thematic vowels. But when you're dealing with an R2, a guttural verb, almost always the pattern is this. And this is what I especially want to point out to you. In your imperfect imperative, you get a patach as your thematic vowel for R2 guttural verbs. And so I will not give you these. These you should be able to, when you see that the root I give you is an R2 guttural, you've got to know, well, in the call, that's always going to be a patach for your imperfect and your imperative. And so that's something you want to keep in mind. For these particular verbs, the vowel pattern, even of the call, is predictable. And so that's something you need to know. But that leads me to the second of my final considerations, and that is, for the first time, there'll be a distinction between the call imperative and the call infinitive construct. If you remember your strong call, katol was both your imperative to ms, but also your infinitive construct. But as you look at that section, you'll see there's a difference now. For your infinitive construct, you're still going to have the holum, and you're going to have that vocal schwa under R1. And again, this looks very similar to your the call that you've already memorized. However, now your imperative is going to be different. Your imperative is going to have that patach, which I've just mentioned to you, that for the imperfect imperative, you've got a patach as your thematic vowel, and there you see it. And so now there's a distinction, and I want you to look very carefully over those examples that I give you. For instance, I give you an imperative 2fs, and of course the form looks like this. And you got to watch out for this form because it can look like a PL form that has an implicit dagesh. So it's a little more complicated. We have to watch out for that. But again, what we have here is your original. Originally, you would think the form would be something like this. You've got your patach here. You've got your vocal schwa. They reduce this vowel, and that gives you two schwas. And so this schwa gets promoted to a patach, and so that's why you get this form here. Bachari. Again, this looks very similar to a seglet noun with a guttural in the initial position. Na'ari. It would look identical to this form. Look over at the infinitive and notice how it varies a little bit. If you want to put the pronominal suffix on the infinitive, look what you get here. You get the kametz chatufs. And again, and this would be something that you would expect. The strong form, you know, you would expect to be something like this, bochri, but again, they don't like that silent schwa, and so you get bochori like this. And again, this is similar to a seglet noun with a guttural here, but it's the O type, like po'oli. Go back to chapter 16 and look at po'oli, and again, that fits this pattern very well. So again, you need to carefully distinguish between your call imperative and your call infinitive construct for these particular verbs. For the forming and parsing of R2 guttural verbs, again, this is going to follow the patterns that we've done before, boxes, colors, and call, with a slight adjustment to the boxes, because what we're going to have to do is make a determination of whether to make it reject the dagesh forte, lengthen the preceding vowel, or whether to see this as an implicit dagesh. So if you look at section 7, we'll just do the one creation, and that's it. We have a PL imperative 2ms from Barach. And so the first thing is, again, your boxes. And these are your normal boxes, like this, for your PL imperative. But what we want to do is we want to decide, are we going to reject that dagesh, or are we going to have it as implicit? And so, again, you have to know that chart. And going back to that chart again, remember what I did is I had like a PL, then a pual here, and then a hithpael. And then I would draw, you know, the aleph, the hey, the chet, the ayin, and then the resh. And of course, very quickly, if we want to do it, obviously it's rejection all down here and all up here. And so that really does give me my answer. The answer is over here with the resh. But remember, the I of implicit is with the chet, so I just go eyes all the way across. Then I draw my little arrows like this, you see. So here are my I's, and here are my R's. And so what we're looking at is a root whose R2 is this resh down here, and we're dealing with a PL, and this would be what I want. I've got to reject, and so I need to reject it. And so my boxes go from this to this, with a long kametz, as you see here. And so that's what I want. And so, as we do the form, for the box, I'll just go ahead, that's a dagesh lene, of course, I'm going to go ahead and put the long kametz there. Then the next step, we have the colors. And remember, what we're dealing with is something like this for your colors. And we need the sere for our particular form. Again, we're doing a 2ms. So it's this form here. I need a sere here. And then for the call, the form is simply katol. There's nothing on the front of Guttural, nothing on the back of Guttural. And so really, the call really does not help us much. And so Barech is our answer, and there we go. So that is the R2 guttural verb. It's now time for you to master the questions and master the whole chapter for that matter and do the drills.